Welcome to another edition of Propping You Up. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. And oh my God, it's not Cody. It's my man, John Stargarian. You guys can follow him at MMA Fox on Twitter. If you guys did not see the last episode of Propping You Up, we let you guys know that right off the bat, fight night episodes are going to be me and John now. Cody has way too much on his plate at the moment, but he is still going to be gracing us with his presence for the pay-per-view episodes. And not to mention, he's also going to be sending me his 3 best prop bets so that I can obviously go over those at the end of the stream as well. So get used to John's face. You guys are going to see it at least 3 times a week here on my channel here on Propping You Up. And then obviously you guys can check him out also on Club and Sub. He's the ringleader over there of that circus of guys. But I love watching the Club and Sub podcast. They usually do it Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys go check that out. And this is new fight night propping you up faces that you guys are going to get used to here with me and John. So, John, first and foremost, what's going on, brother?
Yeah, not a whole lot, man. I'm excited to get into this. I'm actually pretty excited for this card, to be honest. I know we're coming off a pay-per-view, but that wasn't really that fun, right? I think this one's a bit more fun than that card was.
I agree, and I think a couple weeks ago we had the Hall and Strickland card where everybody was shitting on it, but man, that fucking card delivered, man. Like you're not going to get much name value on this card as well, just like we weren't on the other card. But the fights, I believe they will deliver. We have so many great fights matched up here. Saldana versus Lingo is a great fight. Roberts versus Ignacio is a great fight, and then most importantly, Pantoja and fucking Royval is going to be a phenomenal fight. What's the fight that you're looking forward to the most this weekend?
I mean, honestly, I think you have to say Pantoja Royval. Really, I'll tell you this: I'm looking forward to the main event least of any fight on this card. But other than that, probably Guida and Madsen, and we'll get into that. But I am very excited for that fight.
So you're telling me you're more excited for William Knight and Fabio Cherant over fucking Gastelum and Cannonier? Is that what you're trying to say?
Weird things happen when it's low level. It's fun. I don't think anything's going to happen in that main event.
And just as my guy Ryan Grant says here, Parker Porter the GOAT's on the card as well, so I can't wait to watch that. I obviously am not at my normal setup. I'm actually out in Vegas. Most of you guys already know that. And as I was making my way to my hotel room, this caught my eye. So I'm like, obviously I got to start my Las Vegas weekend off with this. Got me a nice cold Modelo that I've never tried before.
Right now.
So let's fucking just crack that open real quick. Let's just.
I am jealous.
Yummy in my tummy. I am so excited for this fucking weekend. I am intending on sustaining a buzz from this moment to the moment that I leave Las Vegas on Sunday. So you guys might get a sloppy lock of the night for the Ultimate Weigh-In show tomorrow as well. I haven't completed the guest there, but I'm looking forward to announcing that as soon as I do. All right. Let's not waste too much more time. We are in a bit of a clock here, or against the clock here. I want to get to the sports book so I can go make some bets on PFL. And I believe PFL starts in just over an hour. So me and John are going to just ring through these matchups. It won't be as in-depth as me and Cody normally get, but when we come back for the next week's episode, it will be back to normally scheduled program. Hour and a half to 2 hours of content. Me and John can fucking riff on all these matchups together. We already have great chemistry, so I'm very much looking forward to this to this team and tandem that we've put together. So let's just fucking let's just get it going. The first fight up that we got is Brahimaj versus Sasha Palatnikov. And in terms of odds, we're looking at Ramiz coming in at minus 140, a little bit of money coming on him. It seems like plus 120 is the return here on Sasha Palatnikov. Way that I see this fight, pretty much Ramiz early, Sasha late. You know what I mean? I don't think that's Ramiz has as horrible cardio as Luis Cosi, but he definitely does slow down as the fight starts to wear on. However, I think he's in luck here, as I don't believe that Sasha Palatnikov's takedown defense is the greatest here. I think Ramiz, if he goes to, how he used to fight in the regional scene, something that we didn't see last time when he went on and took on Max Griffin, I thought he can outstrike him. He almost lost an ear for that effort. But here against Sasha, he should be able to drag this fight to the ground and quickly find a submission, probably in the first or second round. So obviously the props that I'm looking at here, the under 2.5 is the one that I like the most. In terms of a prop, and then in terms of me picking Ramiz, plus 190 by sub, I could see a TKO situation, which is plus 1075. We always have those scenarios where guys who have victories or passive victories to win by grounding their opponents, it's either it's either a submission or a possible TKO when they just rain down blows. So I wouldn't mind a little bit of a sprinkle on Ramiz at plus 1075 on the TKO to potentially get a ground and pound. But I think the best and safest way to play it is just cover them both. Plus 160 for Ramiz inside the distance, I think, is a great line. And the last thing I'll say is Sasha Palatnikov round 3 plus 1325 worth a little bit of a sprinkle and could possibly be a good live betting opportunity as well. John, how did I break that down? Do you agree for the most part?
Yeah, pretty much 100%. I guess the only concern that I'd have with Ramiz is you look at that first fight he had in the UFC with Griffin, where he just looked like pretty much an entirely different fighter than what we saw his entire career before that, where he just decided he was okay with losing a kickboxing match. And I don't expect that to happen here. In fact, I know somebody who knows Ramiz who claims that he's going to grapple aggressively here. And so with that being the case, yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to think Ramiz early, Sasha late. More likely than not, Ramiz early, to be honest. But even in the event that he does do what he did in the Griffin fight, Sasha's not the kind of guy who's going to give him kind of a tepid kickboxing match, right? He's going to go forward and throw. And so with that being the case, and with neither guy having any kind of defense here, I really think this is a pretty solid spot to end inside the distance. So if you're looking at fight props, you can get won't start round 3 at about even money, which I actually think is pretty nice. I think it's nicer than I'm seeing the under minus 125. So the under is not bad either. But in terms of props, that I agree. I think you could double it up with both Ramiz and Sasha inside the distance. You're looking at like plus 160, plus 270 there. But just in general, I mean, I think taking a stab at Palatnikov round 3, like plus 900, and then maybe comboing that up with Brahimaj round 1 submission is a decent way to play it. I believe Ramiz round 1 submission is about plus 400. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to do it if you're trying to cover all outcomes here. Obviously, it doesn't. 400, yeah. Right. Obviously, it doesn't cover all outcomes, but I do think a large portion of Ramiz's win equity is going to be tied to round 1, and if you want to you could always play Sasha round 2, 3, but if you want to get really bold, you can play round 3.
Yeah, exactly. We only shoot for round 3s over here, John. You'll quickly find that out. Especially me. You obviously know my knack and habit of playing those round 3 props. Even if I don't think the fighter's going to win, like this situation, I don't think Sasha's going to win. However, if he is, round 3 doesn't look too bad for us. All right, let's move on to the next fight here. We got Ignacio Bahamondes going up against Royval Roberts. Money coming in on Roberts steadily, minus 150, plus 130 is return on Ignacio Bahamondes. And I like me some Royval Roberts in this spot. I think that there is some recency bias in this spot, especially considering how his last 2 fights have gone. But I want to give him some, a leeway for that, right? Like the Jim Miller fight,
right.
Bad fight IQ moment, slips up. And, I'm sure he learned from that. The Kevin Kroon fight, I absolutely believe that he overlooked him. I don't think he gave him any respect. I think, the short notice nature of Kevin Kroon coming into that fight and then Royval Roberts just being like, okay, I'm a minus 600. I should go in there. There's no way this guy's going to knock me in. Oh, shit, I'm getting club and subbed. Shout out to the Club and Sub podcast. But I do like him in this spot against Ignacio. Ignacio is not going to, submit him or anything like that. I'd be very surprised if that happens. And I do think that there's going to be some sort of overcorrection in the fact that people think that Royval Roberts is now chinny for some reason, where the only time he's ever shown any durability issues was that last fight against Kevin Kroon. So I think we'll see him go out there, touch up Ignacio. Ignacio still seems to struggle with his distance management and, getting hit. I know there's only 2 fights worth of statistical data on him on UFC stats, but he's throwing out 7 strikes per minute and getting landed on 6 strikes per minute, which is not a good look at all. But again, very little data, so it's really hard to truly extract anything from that. But to see a guy like John Makdessi, somebody that you were on, another guy that Mr. Dog Hunter over here was on, John Makdessi going out there and landing at will on Ignacio Bahamondes was not a good look. And I feel like Royval Roberts, slicker boxer, kind of around the same height. I think he's at a 1-inch height disadvantage. I think he should still be able to land, but I think it's going to be the grappling that's going to be the difference maker here. I think he should be able to ground Ignacio time and time again. Whether it ultimately leads to a submission, which is a prop that I don't mind. Roberts by submission plus 345. I wish it was a little bit deeper than that, but I ultimately ended up picking Roberts by decision, which is currently sitting at plus 190. With that said, minus 150, I think, is still a gift of a line for him, considering what his skill set is. And not to mention, this guy was a minus 245 favorite over Vince Pichel a couple fights ago. Where did all this potential that we thought we had of this guy went, especially, if we're just talking about the Jim Miller and Kevin Kroon fight? So there's always that overcorrection. And I feel like people are overcorrecting it here. And Roberts should probably be closer to minus 200, minus 250 in this spot. I'm saying Roberts by decision plus 190. How do you think this one goes down?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it on the overcorrection thing. What's funny about the Kroon fight is when you back a really low-level guy as a plus 400 dog, I wish every plus 400 or 500 dog who's a low-level guy would just do what Kroon did, bite the mouthpiece and just go crazy, because that's really their best chance to win the fight. Yeah, I mean, if Robert settles into that fight, he kills Kevin Kroon. Like there's no doubt in my mind about that. But he got clipped early, and that was that. And I agree. You're seeing like a big time buyback. Like I was not that bull. I haven't been historically that bullish on Roberts as a fighter, but it's not that I hate his skills. He's got decent skills. I just kind of thought people talking about him as maybe a future top 5 guy was a little much. Now he's getting treated as a borderline UFC guy, which doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. He's faced a much better level of competition than Bahamondes did. I don't really rate Bahamondes much whatsoever. I appreciate the volume. I appreciate the size, but we've seen him get walked down by Salvador Becerra. We saw him get walked down by John McDessie. Every time the guy's gotten put on his back, he's looked lost. And so, while he throws a lot and he's big, Roberts is also big. And to your point, he grapples quite well for, a guy who comes from a boxing background. And so I kind of think, I think the obvious one, when looking at props was Roberts by submission, but then you look a little closer, it's like a plus 350. I mean, that's not that much. And then you look at, inside the distance. To me, Roberts inside the distance is plus 250. And you might say, Roberts is not super likely to KO him, but like McDessie hurt him bad with the jab in round 1 of that fight. Bahamondes doesn't have defense, and as long as this fight is in space, Roberts is going to touch him on the chin over and over and over again. And even on the ground, you mentioned it last fight, if Roberts gets into a dominant position, and I do think he'll find dominant positions on the mat here, he might submit him, or he might just choose to throw elbows or rain ground and pound. So, with a gun to my head, I would pick submission in terms of a finishing method. But if you're going to be plus 250 versus plus 350, I'd rather just cover the KO with that.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like the inside the distance, sometimes you just got to be a little bit cautious and safe with it rather than just picking that straight up that straight up prop. The one thing that I always get reminded of when that happens is when I had Tyron Woodley by KO over Darren Till, and this time decides he pulls off the fucking dart stroke or whatever the hell he did that night. I was so pissed off. I'm like, I'm gonna get it, but
with those short little arms too. Like how did he do that?
God damn it. That was such a piss off. All right, let's keep things moving along here. We got Bea Malecki minus 155 going up against Josiane Nunes plus 135. I like me some Bea Malecki in this spot. Actually, I think I skipped a fight. We'll get to the William Knight and Fabio Cherant fight right after that. But pretty simple fight to break down, right? Josiane Nunes looks like a girl that wants to go out there and try to take your head off, kind of plodding, heavy-footed, not really as light on her feet like Veronica Macedo, which is a fight that a lot of people are looking back at and being like, look, she got touched up by Veronica Macedo, but Macedo is a lot more energetic and bouncy, and she blitzes a lot more than Josiane Nunes. And Nunes, don't get me wrong, it's not like she's going to completely miss hitting Bea Malecki in the face. She'll probably land a couple times, but I don't think there'll be as much power or pop on it. One thing I noticed a lot in Nunes' regional tape is that she seems to be losing up until the point where the opponent gasses, and then she takes over and beats him that way. I think Bea Malecki has good enough cardio to stay competitive in this fight for the full 15 minutes, but I don't even think we're going to need 15 minutes here. I actually think Bea Malecki can get her out of there, especially if she can wrap her up with that Muay Thai plum and actually get those knees going. I think that 7-inch height advantage, 7-inch reach advantage is going to be huge here. And Bea Malecki, man, she does have some pretty good knees in that Muay Thai clinch. Obviously, world champion Muay Thai competitor before coming on over to the MMA world. But yeah, I like her in this spot. Maybe minus 155 at this point is a little bit too chalky, but I do like her here. So if that's why we're doing the prop show. Malecki inside the distance, plus 255. Malecki by KO plus 410. Those are the two spots that I like. I also like the under 2.5 because if Josiane Nunes catches her on the chin and puts her away, plus 135 is not too bad of a line there. I believe you're on Bea Malecki in this spot, but how do you think she ends up getting it done?
Yeah, I like Bea a good bit here, to be honest. The bottom line is, I think you touched on it. Like, I would take Veronica Macedo's skill set pretty happily over Josiane Nunes's. You can say whatever you want about Veronica Macedo, but Macedo didn't actually look that bad against Malecki. She just, got Malecki'd really, which is Bea Malecki did what she does, which is just zombie-like go forward and pump output. I think Macedo's a better striker than Josiane Nunes is. To your point, Nunes is losing most of her fights on the regional scene until she's not, and she is not fighting girls who are ever going to sniff the UFC, not even going to get close to it. Most of those girls are having 2 fights and they're done. And now she's here fighting Malecki. And look, she's going to touch Malecki here. I think she'll hit her. She'll probably have some success standing. But the bottom line is Malecki is way bigger. I think she's got 7 inches of height, 7 inches of reach. And we know that she is not going to fade, and she's just going to keep doing it over and over, going forward, working the clinch, working knees. And so I like Malecki. I think her experience, even though there's not as many fights, it's more relevant and more high level than what we're seeing from Nunes. I think she's more durable. She throws more output. Those are just cheat codes in WMMA. In terms of props for the fight, it's kind of weird because, on the one hand, like I was kind of tempted by Malecki inside the distance, and I thought about it a little bit more, and I'm like, man, it's a WMMA fight. Like Macedo was completely gassed out in round 3, and Malecki didn't put her away. So I'm seeing goes to decision minus 135 for this fight in a WMMA fight where I know Malecki's durable and she didn't put Macedo away. So to me, goes the distance is tempting, even though it's a favorite number. And if you really want to play her inside the distance, I actually think Malecki by submission at like plus 800 is interesting because when Malecki does get on the mat, she does look to, sink hooks in and look for submissions.
Yeah, no, she definitely does get under the chin quite often for a couple of her points. I think she has 2 wins on her record with that rear naked choke specifically. I'm still trying to figure out whether she's 2-0 or 4-0 because on Topology it says she's 2-0, and then on 4-0 it takes a couple of the amateur fights and makes the pro fights and make her 4-0. So I have her as 2-0 in all my graphics. I'm always going by Topology. That is now the Bible. RIP, sure dog, it is what it is, but I love me some Topology. I'm glad that we're actually on the same side here as well. All right, let's move on to the next fight. We got Fabio Cherant going up against William Knight, minus 170 for William Knight. The line is significantly dropping, especially considering that he was a minus 275 favorite as the opener. Everybody's on that Cherant side just to get the money down, and I feel as though it's just we're betting numbers here where, both guys don't really bring too much to the table in terms of skill sets and, blowing each other out of the water. I know Fabio Cherant has a decent submission game, but, with an asterisk. And then William Knight, on the other hand, just wants to push you up against the cage, drag you to the ground, and just smother you when he can. When you see these guys score off, it looks like they were going to want to take each other's heads off, and people might be spamming the under in this spot, but watch the tape, that these guys are a little bit more slow and plotting, don't mind, going over that 1.5 mark. And I think that's probably the spot that I'm going to be looking at here. Minus 150, again, a little bit chalky-ish let me see if the line has actually moved. Over 1.5, minus 150, yeah. A little bit chalky, but it feels like this should be a slow, grueling fight, just as all William Knight fights are, and even Fabio Cherant. They seem to have a lack of urgency. I'm still picking Cherant to win this fight. Again, it's more odds-based than anything. The only money that I'm putting on this fight is the over 1.5. If you want to talk about who specifically, Cherant by decision plus 435, not too bad of a spot, I think, but the over 1.5 at least covers a victory on either side. How do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been very vocal about my dislike for William Knight's game, and that I think his striking is amateurish, and I think his wrestling is pretty amateurish as well. But with that said, he is strong and he is going to initiate grappling a lot. And I don't really, me, I love to chase dogs, but I don't really see it with Cherant. Sure, Knight doesn't have a lot of defense. Cherant could knock him out. I guess he could catch a guillotine. But I look at Cherant's grappling, it's he's got a bunch of guillotines against really bad fighters. The guy got Von Flewed last fight. That does not generally happen to decent grapplers. You know what I mean?
Alonzo Manifield of all people too, right?
And so I don't really see it with Cherant. What I'm looking for in a guy to beat William Knight is a guy who's just going to defend takedowns and keep a decent output. Cherant may defend takedowns here. I don't really know. I don't trust his output. He has almost none. And in terms of how it's going to go, Knight's got a bunch of finishes on the regionals, but again, they're against mostly bad fighters, and he hasn't looked like he hits that hard professionally. And so I do side on the Knight side here. I can't lay the chalk here with him, though. I mean, that's crazy, especially with how anti-Knight I am. But what I do think is interesting is Knight by decision is about plus 350, and I don't think he has Manifield catching a Von Flue is an all-time meme moment, but I don't really think Knight has much of a submission game in his back pocket, and so I kind of think a Knight win likely looks a lot like the Camera fight, just a bunch of takedowns from the clinch, holding him there, maybe some ground and pound. But yeah, I mean, I think Knight's decision, I think he wins by decision more than 50% of his wins by a good portion. So I think plus 350 Knight decision would be the best prop I like in this fight.
I like it. Just throwing it out there, the last time, or actually for Alonzo Manifield last time, I'm seeing between plus 2,000 and plus 1,200 for him to win by submission against Fabio Cherant that time. So if anybody called that, shout out to you guys. But let's be honest, nobody was doing that unless it was a mistake. All right, let's move on to this next fight here. This one I'm excited to hear your take on. We got Brian Kelleher going up against Domingo Pilarte. In terms of odds, we got minus 170-ish for Kelleher, plus 150-ish is the return on Domingo Pilarte. I like me some Brian Kelleher here, man. I think that with Domingo Pilarte, he's a little bit restricted with his striking. I mean, it looks good. He throws a nice high kick and he throws a nice left hand down the middle. But outside of that, he seems very wild on the feet. He doesn't seem like a guy that could, maintain a pace that Hunter Azure was trying to put on Brian Kelleher. Brian Kelleher was having some trouble early in that fight against Hunter, and then it seemed like Hunter really started to slow down, and that's when Brian Kelleher was able to catch up to him and eventually knock him out. I think the same thing could have happened here if Domingo Pilarte is unsuccessful in terms of dragging this fight to the ground. I've been saying it all week. I was on Brian Kelleher's IG stream, not on it, but just asking a question to him. And I asked him, I'm like, what do you rate Domingo Pilarte's wrestling in comparison to the other wrestlers that you've been fighting recently? And he goes, I don't think he's going to use it that offensively because he's so tall, right? It's going to be harder for him to get in on the hips and secure these takedowns. So he thinks he's going to use it more defensively than offensively. And then if we're talking about how Domingo's going to win this fight out, other than that, because it seems like he relies on his grappling a lot to win his fights. If he goes out there and tries to outstrike Brian Kelleher, I think that's going to be a bad move for him, as I absolutely believe that this guy still has a bad cardio issue. If you watch some of his regional fights, and there are certain times where you see him just like hands on knees, bending over, huffing and puffing, not a good look at all. And he's going to need all that cardio if he's going to go out there and try to outstrike Brian Kelleher. Sure, he could win the first round, maybe the first round and a half, but I think it's ultimately going to catch up to him. Brian Kelleher will start to lay that pressure, some of those punches, kicks, and then obviously that boom power. And I think I will actually see Kelleher actually finish him probably second or third round in this fight. So I really like Brian Kelleher in this spot. There is a possible desperation takedown from Domingo Pilarte, and we know what that goes right into with Brian Kelleher. Kelleher obviously has a submission up his sleeve. So I would rather take Kelleher inside the distance, which is now plus 110. It was plus 125 earlier this week. Covers both sides. I'm not sure if he's going to get the sub or KO, club and sub, whichever it is, but I think he's going to finish him here. We can even go as deep as talking about the rounds. I don't think it will happen in round one. But round 2, Kelleher is plus 475. Round 3, Kelleher is plus 900. So the bookies are definitely privy on the fact that Pilarte seems to have a bit of a gas tank issue. The last thing I'll say about this fight, I know he won the third round against Felipe Clars, but that was a very energy saving type of position that he was in with that background that he had. He just had the hooks, the body triangle locked on, and Clars couldn't do anything about it. And it didn't even seem like Pilarte was doing much with it in terms of seeking submissions or anything like that. It seemed like he kept his activity level low, which is why I think he was able to maintain that position as long as he did for that third round. If that fight was on the feet, I think he's getting knocked the fuck out, to be honest. How do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, this matchup kind of spooks me a little bit, to be honest, because it kind of going into tape here, I was almost certain I was going to bet Kelleher. I just don't really rate Pilarte that much, but like coming out of it, I still I could never bet Pilarte at plus 150. Like I would need a much better number than that, just because he is so untested and he is so defensively void. Like, he's maybe one of the only guys who's as defensively void as Kelleher is, and I just think Kelleher is a much more proven fighter, but I do worry a bit about, the size and length of Pilarte causing Kelleher some issues here. And, as such, something I think is interesting, I wouldn't be totally shocked if this is somewhat tepid, in the pace that fight's fought at here. Like, I think I expect Kelleher to be a bit better technically everywhere, but I also don't think, it's going to turn into a brawl either, especially with Pilarte's gas issues. And so something I was looking at that I think is kind of interesting is Kelleher by decision is around plus 400 on some books here. And I get Kelleher's got a bunch of submissions in his career, but I mean, is he going to sub Pilarte? Like most of his subs are guillotines or arm bars, and that I don't think that's likely. He could knock him out for sure, and Pilarte does keep his chin high in the air. But if the fight, like I said, I have this feeling it's going to be fairly slow paced, and if that's the case, I kind of think it's a decent bet to go the distance here. So I kind of like Kelleher decision here.
Interesting. I'm glad that you at least like Kelleher to win, because I'd really like Kelleher to win as well. Let's just leave it at that. All right, let's move on to this next fight. We got where are we at? Luis Saldana going up against Austin Lingo. Very interested to hear your thoughts about this one as well. But we got minus 120 for Luis Saldana. Talk about money coming in on Austin Lingo. Luis Saldana opened up as a minus 175 favorite, down to minus 120. And should be a striking matchup for the most part, right? I think if anybody's going to be shooting for takedowns, it's probably going to be Lingo, but I don't think that you can compare his takedowns to what Jordan Griffin was able to successfully do last time against Luis Saldana. I think people might be confusing that as well. I think people saw Austin Lingo, have some grappling in his fight against Jacob Kilburn, and they'll probably believe that he could probably do the same thing here, but I think he's going to struggle to do so effectively against Luis Saldana. I think the best way for Lingo to win is just march forward, but cut off the cage a little bit better. It seems at times he just gets a little bit too lackadaisical and just allowing his opponent to kind of just circle a little bit too well. And I think he's going to struggle, to maintain the pressure and the distance against a guy who fights as well off of his back foot as Luis Saldana does. I think Saldana will do a good job with his kicks, his punches. He has great combinations down the middle, great kick up the middle, not to mention his spinning back kick to the body. So I think he'll be able to keep Austin Lingo at distance. But one shot from Austin Lingo could absolutely change things. I would honestly be a little bit surprised if Lingo wins this fight by decision. I think that the volume will probably come from the Saldana side, at least a more effective looking volume, whereas Austin Lingo is probably just going to be whiffing at air for the majority of this fight. And I think that Lingo inside the distance is probably the best way to bet this fight if you're betting Lingo at all. Plus 280 for him to win inside the distance. And then for me personally, what I'm going to be picking is Saldana by decision plus 255, because by all accounts, Lingo's still quite young in his career, but it seems like he has pretty good durability. He's eaten some big shots in the past. I don't know if Luis Saldana will have that knockout power here. So I'm going Saldana by decision. I think that plus 245, plus 255 is a very solid line as well. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, so I do agree with someone winning by decision, but I don't agree with it being Saldana, to be honest. I'm actually kind of pondering a play on Lingo on the money line. I mentioned it on my podcast last night. I'm a bit annoyed at it because it was plus 130 last week, and all I saw were people betting Saldana, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get plus 150 here. And then I wake up the next morning, and it's plus 110. So I've been kind of praying it would go back up, and it hasn't. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I'm bullish on Lingo as a fighter. I'm not bullish on him, but I do think, in terms of like what his best skills are, I actually think he's a pretty damn good boxer, when he can force the pocket. And I actually don't think, despite the Zalal fight, that he's really horrible at cutting off the cage. He slowed down fast in that fight. And the bottom line is Zalal does do a decent job moving laterally. Like, he's not a super sharp striker, but he moves laterally very well. And I'm not really sure Saldana can do that. Like, I actually think Lingo's a much better boxer than him. And so the question is, can, Saldana mimic the Zalal game plan? But, like, we have a fight to kind of draw data from, which was Zalal against Griffin and Saldana against Griffin. And Griffin couldn't get Zalal in the pocket pretty much that entire fight, whereas he was basically able to just sprint at Saldana, chase him down, and force exchanges throughout that fight. And, seeing that, I'm like, well, if Griffin could do it, I kind of trust Lingo's footwork a lot more than I trust Griffin's footwork. Like, I think he'll be able to force exchanges here. I don't really rate Saldana's grappling much at all. And, even if he could land takedowns, Zalal is a decent submission grappler. Saldana is not really. I don't really think and if Zalal couldn't hold Lingo down much, I don't think Saldana is going to. And so, like, I actually favor Lingo in this matchup. And I think, look, he could knock Saldana out, but also I kind of think the general dynamic, especially what we saw at the Griffin fight, right, is Saldana doesn't really want to engage in big exchanges. That seems pretty clear. And so if that's the case and he's not going to just let Lingo open up with big combinations, I actually think betting Lingo by decision is pretty interesting here because I do think he has the front foot optics on him. I do think he's going to have more success with his hands and with head strikes. And by decision, it's plus 300. And like we saw it with last fight where, everybody, myself included, bet the under against Kilburn, and that went the distance. He can win a decision, and I kind of think he's going to here.
All right. I can definitely see the argument for sure, especially if he's successful in tracking down Saldana and actually getting his hands off and landing some big strikes. I think that if he does successfully do that, he'll probably knock his ass out. That's kind of my concern there, but I can definitely see your approach for this one as well. All right, let's move on to the next fight. First fight on the main card. And before I do that, I want to remind you guys, we got about 80 people in here right now. Make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe. And then I forgot to do it this time, but I was going to drop the Club and Sub link in the description below. So make sure you guys go on YouTube, Club and Sub podcast, and subscribe to those guys over there. Again, every Wednesday night. John, Legs, Luke sparring with reality betting, and sometimes C, the ever globe-trotting C, is going to be on that show. So make sure you guys go check them out. Love these guys. Very, very solid and sharp dudes. All right, main card time, and I can't believe they're actually starting off with this fight. I might have to go back to my hotel and change my pants and come back to the Apex. But Alexandre Pantoja versus Brande motherfucking Royval. We got minus 180-ish on Alexandre Pantoja and plus 160 here on Brandon Royval. And I've already made it my dog of the night play. I'm going with the under in this fight, under 2.5 at plus 125. I think mix in Brandon Royval's chaotic style of fighting. I like to call him mini Tony Ferguson because it's just like they don't really show much technical skill, but they just create chaos and they're able to thrive in that chaos. And more often than not, they come out with their hand raised, just as we saw in the Kai Kara-France fight for Brandon Royval. Like his reaction for getting hit and rocked is to throw a spinning elbow instead of a takedown. Like, who the fuck does that? Nobody. Brandon Royval does that shit. But yeah, I think that this fight's going to be high paced from the get go. And not to mention, it wasn't that long ago that a lot of people believed that Alexandre Pantoja had cardio issues. If he still does, this is the fight that it's going to show, because Brandon Royval is going to put on a pace that Alexandre Pantoja will struggle to keep up with, unless that his technical striking actually, catches Royval when he's trying to close the distance, doing some of the weird and crazy shit that he does. I know when these guys have lost, not a lot of those have come via finish, but I think that the way that these guys match up specifically here, the chaotic nature that Brandon Royval brings, and the finishing abilities of Pantoja and even Royval himself, I think it would lead to a finish here. I'm actually leaning on the Royval side. I think that he can club and sub him probably in the second or third round in this fight. So I would actually more so look at the rounds for Royval than actually the method, because again, could be TKO, could be ground and pound, could be club and sub or a submission of any sort. But Royval round 2 is plus 775. Royval round 3 is plus 1525. Gotta take a shot on that. I just think that if he can survive early here against Pantoja, he could make it very difficult for him late and possibly finish him as well. Bring me back down to earth, because I feel like I'm very high on Raw Dog here. How do you feel about this matchup?
It's a tough one because, like, again, Royval's a guy I've been very vocal about not really liking his game, except something I've kind of come around to is, some guys, like I think you touched on the Tony Ferguson thing, they're not very technical. They're not great grapplers and they're not, great strikers, but they bring a ridiculous amount of pressure and volume. And that kind of style is very hard to deal with, especially if you're like you saw in the Kara-France fight. Like, Kara-France did not want the war. He didn't want to bite down, and he didn't really have, the technical ability to kind of stay on his bike there. And then once he tried to grapple, he got submitted. Pantoja's weird because, I can't, if it wasn't for the Askarov fight, I'd probably bet him here, even on the money line. But that fight did happen, and he gassed out bad in that fight. And it was 2 fights ago for him. And then he was so low volume against Kopp that we didn't really get to see whether or not that was, a thing now. So that scares me, and it's enough to deter me from the money line, especially because I think Pantoja's best path here is probably grappling, and the guy never grapples. So, I think he's probably going to stand. But with that said, I do think Pantoja is the more skilled fighter everywhere. And I do think, while I agree with your point, I think Royval, if he can get out of the early portion of this fight, can probably take over and potentially finish. I do not think the chances... Well, I shouldn't say they're not great. I think there's a very high chance, though, of Pantoja putting him out early here. Pantoja is a more technical striker, and unlike the guys Royval has faced to date, Pantoja, as we saw in the Davidson-Figueiredo fight, is not afraid of the war. He is willing to bite the mouthpiece and let his hands go. He's done it too many times for his own health, to be honest. But, in terms, if they're going to swing, and I think there's a good chance they will, Royval is much more hittable than Pantoja is, and he keeps his chin up in the air. And so I favor Pantoja here everywhere. Like I said, I have concerns about cardio. I wouldn't play him on the money line. He should win this fight, and I actually think if you want to bet him, playing the KO line at plus 450 is pretty nice, because I do think if he stands in there and lets his hands go, he's got a very strong chance to take Royval out.
I like it. Again, as long as I'm under 2.5 hits, your boy's happy. That's all I'm going to say. All right, let's move on to the next fight here. This one is a pick 'em pretty much. We got Austin Hubbard going up against Vince Pichel, and I feel like there's just some sort of fog in people's minds, as I believe that Pichel should probably be a little bit bigger of a favorite in this spot. We know the unfortunate booking that Austin Hubbard has been taking over his last 6 fights, with the exception of the Kyle Prepelic fight. Shout out Kyle Prepelic, Canadian. But Davey Hamosh, fucking Joe Selecki, Marco Madsen, Dakota Bush, even on short notice, they still find a fucking grappler for him. And now, Mr. Vince Pichel. Pretty easy fight to break down, right? You got Austin Hubbard, who wants to keep this fight vertical, get his kicks off, get his striking off. Vince Pichel has serviceable enough striking where I think he could stay competitive in the striking realm. But I think that if it stays in that realm for the full 15 minutes, Austin Hubbard will probably come out with the win. However, I do think we'll see Pichel actually successful on takedowns here, controlling the fight, dragging into the ground or even clinch positions up against the cage. He's shown even at 38 years old that this guy can still scramble pretty well, still do land pretty good takedowns. And I think the 38 is kind of, slightly offset considering the fact that Vince Pichel only has 15 pro MMA fights. There's not a lot of fight miles on this guy's record or on his body. So I think he's not like other 38 years old who have, 40, 30 or 40 fights on their record. Pichel has half of that. So the spot that I actually really like the most here, I think everybody can agree that this fight is probably going over 2.5, right? It's minus 270 what the line is, but I think whoever wins will probably win by decision in this spot. And I like Pichel by decision at plus 170. I think his money line is great as is, but again, this is a fucking prop show. So how do I think he's going to win? I think he's going to be by decision. Plus 170, not too bad, but you might as well fire on the money line in case he does decide to snatch up a submission or a TKO of some sort. But my favorite prop, plus 170 on Vince Pichel via decision, or if you want a chalky spot to parlay or something, minus 270 on the over 2.5. I think that somewhat safe. How do you feel about this matchup?
So let me throw a curveball at you here, Locke. How about
that? That's what I like.
I also like Vince Pichel here. I'm probably going to bet him. Hubbard line's been taking money all week. I'm kind of just hoping Pichel is going to move to underdog. And I agree with most of what you said. I would give Hubbard a slight edge on the feet. He's a decent striker, and he's probably going to have a pace advantage and has a bit more tools than Pichel does. But to your point, the bottom line is, and I've seen takes that Hubbard's improved his grappling, and I just don't really buy it. We saw a half-dead Dakota Bush take his back in round 3 of his last fight. And we know historically Pichel is going to attempt 6-7 takedowns per 15 minutes and land, like 3 or more. And with that being the case, I have to favor Pichel to win the fight. And then, from a prop perspective, what does Hubbard always do whenever if he stuffs a takedown and he gets forced to the fence, he doesn't disengage. In fact, he has a very, very specific tendency, which is give his back right away. Gives up a body lock, gives his back up. It happens almost every fight whenever someone tries to take him down. And, Pichel, he's not a great submission grappler, but, I believe he's a brown belt. He knows what he's doing. And I do think the chance of him getting Hubbard's back a couple times in this fight is fairly high. And so with that being the case, I'm looking at this right now. Now, Pichel's sub is only, I think it's plus 800 on 5 times, which is kind of whatever. But if you have DraftKings or BetMGM, I'm seeing Pichel's sub at plus 2,000 right now. And
holy fuck.
Yeah. And to me, that is, that's nutty. So, that would be, that would be my way to play this in terms of a prop outside of the Pichel money line. But yeah, I think Pichel has all the skills that have troubled Hubbard to date in the UFC, and I expect him to win this fight.
The last time Vince Pichel has pulled off a sub is not even on Tapology. Does he even have a submission? Does he have a submission victory on his record?
He's due, right?
Is that what we're calling? He has a grand total of 0 submission victories on his record. He has 8 KOs out of his 13 victories. So maybe he will decide to go with the ground and pound more so than the sub. But just for you, John, I'm going to hope that he goes for the sub just in case.
Bahamondes didn't submit Hubbard, but Vince Pichel will.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. There's all the narrative that you need, brother. All right, let's move on to Trevin Jones, who has just been cursed to shit because he can never get a fucking opponent. He's going up against Saeed Yokob Kakhramonov, who's stepping in on short notice. He is actually the CFFC bantamweight champion who never defended his title. He was a minus 500 against the guy that he was fighting. So obviously he's going to win that fucking fight, but he never actually ended up defending the title. So I think there's always something to be said about those types of guys. But here he is coming in against Trevin Jones, and goddamn, talk about that line movement earlier, right? Like I think we saw Trevin Jones open up as a minus 300 favorite, and he got quickly bet down to an underdog around plus 114, plus 110. We saw the line, and now he's starting to even out over there at minus 140. Return on Kakhramonov is plus 120. I was kind of impressed from what we saw from Kakhramonov, considering the short notice nature of this fight, right? This isn't a Justin James by any means, right? This isn't who's that guy that tested positive for cocaine and got
Daquan,
talking about, right? No. There's another guy. He was like fucking Ecuadorian. He was like Ecuadorian or some shit, low level, lower weight class. Either way, the guy, he got absolute. No, not Gary Gorey. There's somebody else. Man, somebody in the chat's gonna know. No. I think it was like a 25 or 35. I feel like he lost to Gustavo Lopez. I think Lopez is the one who he stepped in and fought and then eventually got finished. Somebody in the Ronderos, there you go, Hype MMA. Juan
If he lost to
Carlos.
Gustavo Lopez, he won't be in the
Yes.
UFC.
Juan Carlos Ronderos tested positive for cocaine. Shout out to my guy Hype MMA. This is not a Juan Carlos Ronderos. This is a kid that could, well, more than likely get a couple wins inside the UFC. He has a judo background, seems to have some decent grappling, a little bit wild with the striking, but definitely has some power in his hands, as we saw in his second last fight against Askar. And I think this is going to be a fun fight, but the spot that I'm going to be looking for most, and it doesn't look like best fight odds actually has any of the props out for this fight, so it's going to be interesting to see how we break this one down. But I think if they set the over-under at 2.5, I'm going to be looking at taking the under here because I do think that both guys have finishing capabilities. I think it's actually going to be Trevin Jones, though, that finds that knockout blow here. I haven't always been the highest on Trevin Jones, but he's definitely gaining the respect of us, especially, plus 300 favorite in his first fight against Timur Valiev, plus 200 against fucking Mario Bautista, and he was just about to be another underdog year against Saeed, but then the public, smartened up a little bit and gone back to a minus 140. Again, I think this fight is violence, pretty much. I think Saeed's going to come into this knowing that he doesn't have the cardio to go a full 3 rounds, so let me go out there and try to get this done with, and I think he's ultimately going to end up getting caught. I like Trevin Jones. Again, no props yet. I'm probably going to take the under 2.5 as one of my unofficial untracked bets. But Trevin Jones by KO is the one that I'll be looking at. How do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I thought the opening line was pretty close to correct, to be completely honest with you. And I don't hate Kakhramonov, but I think something that's kind of, we look at tape and we take fighters in a vacuum. We're like, oh, look at how he fights. He shouldn't be lying like this, without really considering, first of all, there's a pretty substantial experience gap. There's a UFC experience gap. Kakhramonov's had cardio issues in the past, and now he's taking this fight on 3 days' notice. He hasn't been training for him. And so, meanwhile, Trevin Jones had 7 fights canceled in the last 2 months. So the guy's been doing nothing but training. So it's like, it's a horrible spot for him to begin with on that end. I do think he can be competitive early in the fight. But I also think eventually, if he goes at the pace he needs to be competitive, I don't think his cardio can hold up for 3 rounds here. And I do think eventually Jones is just going to take over this fight. Whether that's KOing him on the feet, I'm not sure. But because Jones is actually, it's kind of funny because we haven't really seen much of it in the UFC, but Jones actually comes from a grappling background, and he's actually a pretty decent grappler. And I sort of think, when Kakhramonov's tank starts to go, he probably gets him down. And I don't know if he subs him, but I think he probably finishes him on the mat at some point. I just think Jones is a much more proven fighter than Kakhramonov is. In terms of what I'd be looking to play, I agree with you. I think the under is good because I do think if it does cover the Kakhramonov win condition, I'd be a bit surprised for his cardio to hold up long enough for him to win 2 rounds here, even though Jones can be a bit low output. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge experience gap. I'll be curious to see the numbers, but the under 2.5, we get a decent plus number on it, I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I think that we're going to get some. I'd be surprised if we I'd say plus 150-ish. Jones KO is probably going to be the line. I've seen a lot of people already talking about it. They're like, I'm going to take Jones by KO. And I think we'll see that the odds makers are going to be pretty privy to that and hop on that as well. All right, let's move on to the third fight of the night and probably people's main event here. We got Parker Porter going up against Chase Sherman. In terms of odds, we're looking at minus 190 for Sherman, plus 165 for Parker Porter. I feel like this is a Chase Sherman early, Parker Porter rounds 2 and 3 possibly. I mean, I think Sherman needs to get him out of there. Otherwise, I think he's going to struggle to deal with the style of Parker, right? Like Parker, as much of a joke as he is within this MMA betting community, he still has solid skill set in terms of being like a heavyweight at this level. And I feel like Chase Sherman is roughly around this level as well. He absolutely honey-dicked me with that Ike Villanueva performance, man. Like, I'm like, oh, this guy looked fucking phenomenal. And then, like, I remember Dan from Best Fight Odds messaged me right after. He goes, dude, steroids. I'm like, oh, yeah, shit. I totally forgot. He got popped by steroids after that. So I did wind it back a little bit, but we definitely saw the effects in the Andre Arlovsky fight, right? Like, he was marching Arlovsky down for the majority of that fight, but he just wasn't throwing anything. Andre Arlovsky was winning that fight off his back foot. And I feel like Parker Porter here could almost do the same thing in terms of he doesn't have he doesn't have comparable footwork to Andre Arlovsky. We got to absolutely state that out there. But I think his ability to, rush forward with a couple blitz attacks, throw some punches that are actually going to start swaying the judges, or even, engage in the clinch, push him up against the cage. He definitely did that a couple times against Josh Parisian to, win minutes and win some seconds. He has a good leg kick as well, which I think will be very important for him here, especially to take the power off the punches of Chase Sherman. But I think if Chase Sherman doesn't get him out of there early, I think this is Parker Porter's fight, man. And again, I'm not trying to say this just to be the Parker Porter fucking guy, but I think we saw a lot from Chase Sherman last time, that if he wasn't able to hurt, drop, or even rock Andrei Arlovski at all, I think, maybe the USADA stuff that he was on was helping him. Last thing I'll say about this Chase Sherman, down at Sanford MMA. He's making a change. Hopefully he goes back to maybe kicking calves like he was doing against Ike Villanueva, because I expect him to do that against Arjun Arlovski. And it was Arlovski doing the calf kicking, which was surprising to me. I think Parker Porter is going to be attacking the leg as well. Very interesting to see how this fight plays out. I think the line's a little bit too wide. I know there's a ton of people super confident on Chase Sherman, but I think that this is a little bit too wide. So obviously the way that I'd be attacking this, over 1.5, minus 165, a little bit chalky, but Parker Porter via decision plus 435. You're damn right. And if you don't hear me cheering for Parker Porter during this fight, you guys are more than welcome to slap me afterwards.
Well, if I hear you cheering for Parker Porter during this fight, I'm going to be pretty unhappy with you.
Break it down, brother. Break it down.
So I actually do like Chase Sherman a good bit here, to be honest, which I know it's so out of character for me because I love playing underdogs, and now I'm laying juice on Chase fucking Sherman here. But I guess for me to convince me that this line is short, or, it should be a competitive fight, you have to tell me that Porter's going to have big time grappling success. And I don't really he's an okay grappler on top, but I don't think his wrestling is that great. And he's also not a guy who's going to come out and attempt, 8-10 takedowns. And so I think most of the fight's going to largely play out standing. And standing, look, yeah, I mean, Sherman doesn't have much defense. That's true. But he is very durable. Porter also doesn't have much defense, and I don't think he's that durable. And so when I'm looking at the two of them, I think there's a big technical edge for Sherman, both in terms of the calf kicks and just his boxing in general. And like I said, I think he has a big durability edge. I think he has a pretty big power edge. And so you look at the guys who have beaten Chase Sherman in his career, and I mean, all of them would handle Parker Porter with relative ease, which doesn't mean Sherman necessarily will, but I sort of think he will. I think his attritional work is going to be a little bit too much for Porter. I think it's going to look a lot like the Dawkins fight, if I'm being completely honest. And I think he's going to get him out of there relatively early. Look, it could get dicey if it gets late, but Sherman's got a lot of output. And again, I trust the experience edge. I trust the level edge. I trust the technical edge that he has here. So, I mean, I like Sherman a good bit. In terms of what I'd play, I like Sherman KO plus 150. And if we're being completely honest, I think a significant portion of that KO equity is round one, which is plus 300. And so I like Sherman in round one. I like Sherman KO. But yeah, I think he's going to take care of business here. The Vanilla Gorilla is back.
look at fucking John all heavy on Chase Sherman here, but I get it. The durability issue of Parker Porter is a bit of a concern for me here. However, I'm ranking Chris Delkus way higher than Chase Sherman at this time, specifically with their boxing. Right, that's something we're definitely seeing a huge improvement from Chris Delkus. Hand speed, precision, and just ability to find the target, I think is really good. I think that Chase Sherman has a little bit of issues with that, but again, durability, a huge question mark here for Mr. Parker Porter. All right, let's move on to the co-main event here, and I can't wait to get into this one. We got minus 155 for Mark Madsen, now training at Fight Ready. That's obviously very important to lay out here. He's been there for about 3 months. He's taken on the Carpenter, the veteran Clay Guida, plus 135. In terms of line movement here, we did see some Marco Madsen actually open up at minus 125, get down to around minus 170, and then that money came back in on Clay Guida here. I'm actually in your line of thinking in this spot, and you are Mr. Dog Country yourself, so I'll let you break this one down a little bit heavier than me. But again, cardio is the main factor here, right? The output and the pace of Clay Guida is going to be something difficult for Mark Madsen to keep up with, and you don't just see guys, fixing cardio issues from one fight to another. You need to see it over a period of time, and I'd be surprised if we see a huge improvement from him here. It's going to come down to round two. If Mark Madsen doesn't get him out of there in the first round with a submission, which I don't think is likely, it's going to come down to who wins round two, because I'm more than certain that Clay Guida is going to win round three. Even if he gets taken down in round three, I think that he'll have good enough get-ups to get back to his feet and then start winning that round again. Yeah, I'll let you break this one down a little bit more, but I do like Clay Guida here. Clay Guida by decision is currently sitting at plus 275. That's probably my best bet for this or best prop for this fight. I'd be surprised if Clay Guida actually finishes Mark Madsen here. Mark Madsen, bad cardio, almost got finished by Austin Hubbard. I think Hubbard would have an easier time finishing Madsen than what Guida is going to be bringing to the table here. But yeah, I like Guida, his pace, output, his inability to stay still, I think, is the main reason I think he's going to win this fight. And then obviously by decision. How do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, so I'll be honest here. I'm more worried about the vitamins they have over at Fight Ready than I am for anything Mark Madsen's going to do in an MMA fashion to Clay Guida here. I don't really understand the line, to be completely honest. Even, I keep hearing, maybe enter on Guida live, but even live, even round one, is Mark Madsen a lock to win round one in this fight? When you look at the guys Madsen's fought, he finished Danilo Belluardo, who is not in the UFC, lost 2 fights and was out. He went out there and he beat Austin Hubbard, and you touched on it, gassed out hard. But even in the early portion of that fight, he landed virtually no strikes early in the fight. He pretty much was taking him down. Hubbard was giving his back and getting up without any issue at all. He wasn't putting hooks in. He was just kind of controlling the position. Hubbard doesn't scramble. I mean, that's just the reality here. It's one of the reasons I like the Pichel sub is because Hubbard's not going to scramble out of bad positions. Now you take Clay Guida, a guy who is an excellent scrambler. He's fought much better MMA grapplers than Mark Madsen and won scrambles there and had competitive grappling matches. And so for me, you look at this and it's like Mark Madsen to win this fight pretty much has to toss Clay Guida around and do kind of what he did to Hubbard. I don't think he's going to get him in the position on the mat where he can KO him with ground and pound. I just don't really think it would be very surprising, especially because it's not like we haven't seen Guida in a couple of years. We saw him a couple months ago and he looks pretty good. So I don't think that's going to happen. And so he needs to maintain control and maintain a body lock to win this fight. And we just have never seen anybody control Guida like that before. And if Guida can get away and get a distance, I think he's clearly the better striker. I think he clearly hits harder, to be honest. People forget because Guida's been fighting, just much better strikers recently. Guida actually hits pretty hard. And then even in terms of the grappling, I heard from somebody who I trust that Roskopf, when he was training with Madsen, was tapping him in the gym pretty consistently. Now, I'm not saying whether or not Guida is a better submission grappler than Roskopf is, but I do think there's a lot of questions about what happens if Madsen gets taken down. I keep hearing people say, oh, he's an Olympic wrestler, but you're not an Olympic wrestler in takedown defense on the cage. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're not an Olympic wrestler in jiu-jitsu. You're a wrestler. Like, what happens when he gets put on his back? Is he going to give it up? Is he just going to get stuck there? Both of those are very live outcomes. And so I guess my view more or less is I agree with you. I think round 3 is probably going to be one-way traffic. But even in the early rounds, I expect Guida to be able to scramble out of control. And given the dynamic striking, it's very hard for Madsen to win this fight without building up a ton of control. And so I think Guida should be a pretty significant favorite here. Or not significant, but like 60, 65%. I think Madsen's best chance to win this fight, or not best chance, but I think he's more live for a guillotine than he is for his cleanly blanketing Guida for 3 rounds, to be honest, because Clay does have that tendency to stick his neck, into guillotines. We've seen it over and over. But yeah, I mean, I just think the line is very wrong. I think it's very easy to look at what someone's done wrestling to regional bums and Austin Hubbard and say, oh, they're going to ragdoll Clay Guida. Like, okay, I don't really buy it. If it happens, okay, great, I'm wrong. But I think this should be Clay all day. In terms of props, I touched on the thing, with Madsen getting tapped in the gym. I think there's 2 ways to look at this, to be honest. It's either Guida late round props, like round 3, because that's very live. Guida sub is plus 700, which isn't awful. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty built into, Madsen, because if he does have decent submission defense now, he probably survives. To be honest, what I like the most is probably Guida decision. Plus 300 Guida decision. Guida wins in round 3, looking at about plus 2,000. I think that's pretty good as well. But that's how I'd split it up. But I think Guida's going to take care of business here. I bet him pretty big on the money line. I'll probably add to his decision line.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he actually gets to finish in this spot. I think plus 300 on that decision prop is some money here. We know that's Guida's normal path to victory. And again, he's going to have this guy out cardioed. So I'd be surprised if Marco Madsen actually has enough to actually win 2 full rounds of activity, especially against a guy like Clay Guida. All right, main event time. And another time for me to remind you guys, make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe, and then go over there and follow John as well on Twitter at MMA Fox. His Twitter handle is right there on the screen for you guys. Jared Cannonier minus 145 going up against Kelvin Gastelum plus 125. Cannonier opened up as a minus 225 favorite, has quickly gotten bet down. Shout out to anybody that got Gastelum at plus 185 or better, even plus 150 or better, to be honest, because I think that Gastelum actually should win this fight. I'm kind of itching my head in terms of where is Jared Cannonier actually better than him outside of power and some good leg kicks. Outside of that, I think Gastelum, he is a little bit rudimentary with his striking, but his blitzing attacks with that 1-2 down the middle and also his hook, I believe it's his right hook, which is pretty nasty as well. Obviously, a ton of power in his strikes as well. I think that's definitely something that we need to give a little bit more respect. It seems like people are forgetting that Kelvin Gastelum actually has some power in his hands. And then also that Kelvin Gastelum wrestling and scrambling and jiu-jitsu, I think it's still good, but people are kind of shitting on it because he got heel hooked by Jack Hermanson a couple fights ago. I think we need to remember that he's actually still a good wrestler. I think that will come into play if this fight at least reaches the third round, because I think it's going to be difficult for Gastelum to get anything off in those first two rounds with much certainty, especially with him having to worry about the big power coming his way from Jared Cannonier. Cannonier could be the first guy to stop Kelvin Gastelum by punches. He absolutely has the power to do so, but I'm not going to believe that until I actually see Kelvin Gastelum's chin get cracked. And truly, I don't think that Jared Cannonier is truly that good. The guy has good power. That's really about it. Again, good kicks as well when he really sets in on them. But I think that Gastelum should be able to beat him in this spot. I think people are just quick to write off Kelvin Gastelum, especially considering that he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. But it's not like he's losing to bums. Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya, the Jack Hermanson hook, that one was a little bit weird. But he's losing to quality opponents. That 5 fights ago, he's fighting for the interim middleweight strap. Like, the guy is still up there, and he's only 29 years old. So I feel like, he might have some fight miles on his body, but I still believe that he has the potential to go out there and be, what we believe he is, and I think he still is. And I think that this is a perfect matchup for him to go out there and showcase that. So in terms of the props, how I'm going to be looking to tackle this, if you have access to alternate props over 3.5, I really like. That's something that Clint actually brought up when I did a show earlier this week. But minus 125 for over 3.5, I don't think that's a bad spot. I think that Gastelum's durability will hold up, and I think that Cannonier's durability will hold up for at least 3.5 rounds. Then we get to find out what's his cardio like. Once we actually find out what Cannonier's cardio is like, especially going into round 4 and 5, then we'll see, will Gastelum be able to finish this fight? Will he be able to ground it, get his jiu-jitsu going, possibly find a choke of some sort? Could happen. So I like, I think it was actually Legs who I heard on your show talking about Gastelum rounds 4 or 5 in decision. If you have access to that prop, I think that's a great prop. But even if you just play them, separately, as I think most people who don't have access to FanDuel and DraftKings in those spots, plus 23.25 for Gastelum in round 4, plus 31.50 for Gastelum in round 5, and then Gastelum by decision is sitting at plus 245. Those are the spots I like. Am I not giving enough credence to Jared Cannonier, or do you think Gastelum takes this fight as well?
I'm almost speechless here, and like I said it on my podcast last night, but like, I very rarely have trouble imagining in my head how a fight will play out. Even if I'm wrong about how it ends up playing out, I usually at least have a feeling about like how I think that fight's going to play out. And with this one, I really struggle to like have any kind of feeling about it. The weird thing about Jared Cannonier is I still don't even know if we know what he is. He loses to Jan at light heavyweight, which again, that was at the start of Jan's run. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He gets knocked out by Reyes in about 2 minutes. Can't take anything from it. But then you look at his next 3 fights after that. We have the Silva fight, which is, Silva just died, gets his leg kicked off. You have the David Branch fight where, look, I mean, he showcased some good defensive grappling in that fight. And eventually KO'd him, but Branch basically gassed out before he got KO'd. He was winning the fight pretty cleanly. And in fairness, Branch is a good grappler, so nothing wrong with that. And then the Hermanson fight's almost identical. He doesn't gas out, but he out-grapples him for a round and then gets knocked out. And so then you have the Whittaker fight where, again, I don't know how much to take from that because Whittaker's the former champ and is pretty clearly the second best fighter in that division. And so is Cannonier this changed guy from light heavyweight? I'm not really sure. He might be. He might not be. What I will say is he hits very hard. He seems to be very, very durable, and he kicks legs very well. But he's also remarkably low output, and he doesn't grapple. And with Kelvin, I agree with you. I think he's in this weird spot where, like, I think him getting touted as a top 3 to 5 guy was probably always overstating the case a little bit, just based on how he kind of built that up there. But I think we saw in the Ian fight, he is. He's a top 15 guy. His boxing is good enough that he can compete really with anybody. And so you have Kelvin, who's fought as good or better competition than Cannonier. He can, I think, in terms of boxing, I think he's the better boxer. And then you have Cannonier, who has all this uncertainty. But the one thing they both have in common is they're both extremely durable. That is, Gastelum basically is a concrete chin and cannot be finished. And Cannonier is, look at that Whitaker fight. That guy had a broken arm and was just getting beat off on for 2 rounds and still almost comes back in that round 3, And so I think those are the 2 things you can count on. In terms of the fight itself, like I said, I don't have a great read as to how it's going to play out. I kind of side with Gastelum by decision at like plus 400. I kind of like, because I do think in a fight that's going to be probably very low volume, where I'd be surprised if either guy gets finished, one of them is going to be throwing more head strikes than the other. And that guy's Gastelum. Almost everything Gastelum does is to the head. It's all boxing based. And whether for better or worse, and I think worse, but the reality is judges score head strikes better than leg strikes. It's just, the way it is. And so I'd expect Gastelum's optics to be a bit better. He's probably going to be on the front foot more. He's going to land more head strikes. If he wobbled Cannonier a couple of times, it wouldn't shock me. And it wouldn't shock me if Cannonier wobbled him a couple of times. But ultimately, I think goes the distance is a good bet at plus 100. I'm kind of leaning Kelvin, but again, I don't have a great feel for it. But if I was going to bet a prop on a side, it would be Kelvin by decision at plus 400.
I like it. Yeah, for me, the rounds 4 and 5 Gastelum thing is more so that I just want to see what Cannonier's gas tank looks like that late in the fight.
Yeah. It covers that outcome.
Much, right? Yeah, for sure. Exactly. All right. That is pretty much the card. We got through it at just the hour mark. I fucking love that. But we are going to end the show with the 3 best prop bets from me, John, and Cody. I'm going to be giving you guys Cody's as well. Unfortunately, no fancy graphics for you guys this week, so you guys are just gonna have to hear it from our mouths here. So I'll kick things off. First and foremost, I like me some Brian Kelleher inside the distance plus 110. Again, plus 125 was obviously a better number earlier in the week, but still I think at that plus money, that's more than likely his best win condition in this fight, inside the distance plus 110. Secondly, I like Royval and Pantoja fight doesn't go to decision minus 105. That's another prop that I really like. I think it's going to be a chaotic fight. Pantoja early or Royval late. You can also poke that Royval round 3 prop if you like. I think it's around plus 1400 or plus 1600. And then lastly, I like Vince Pichel via decision at plus 170. I think that's how he gets it done. But for John's sake, I will be praying and hoping for that submission prop because, if Davey Hamill couldn't do it, Vince Pichel probably could. I'll quickly give you guys Cody's, and then we're going to go over to John here. Cody likes Saldana and Lingo fight goes to decision, minus 125. He likes Porter and Sherman fight goes to decision at plus 150. And lastly, he likes, I don't like this one, but he likes it, Ignacio Bahamondes via decision plus 300. That's where he's going with. John, what are your 3 favorite props here?
Yeah, so my first one is going to be actually Kelleher wins by decision at about plus 400 there. My next one is going to be Pichel by sub. Obviously, like I mentioned, you can get it at plus 2,000 on DraftKings or BetMGM. If you can get it over plus 1,200 or better, I think I like that spot a lot. And then the last one is going to be it's a combination of Sherman ITD, which is plus 150, and Sherman in round 1, which is plus 300. I just split the difference on those 2. But yeah, that's what I like this week.
Perfect. All right. You guys already know I'm out in Vegas. If you want to follow my misadventures and my adventures and all that type of shit, check out my Instagram. I'm going to be posting most of my stuff on there at MMALOTN on Instagram there. Obviously, you guys can follow me at MMA on Twitter or at MMALOTN on Twitter as well. You guys can follow John at MMA Fox. It's obviously on the screen there. John, anything you want to say on the back end here? I'd say first successful show, right? We got some great chemistry. Yeah. I love it. Anything you want to say on the back end here?
No, I had a great time. It's going to be a lot more fun next week when we do it at the regular time. Maybe I'll have a Modelo as well that time, since it won't be towards the end of my workday.
Exactly.
Hopefully, yeah, I had a great time. I'm pumped for it, guys. Bet Clay Guida. I'm telling you, do the right thing.
I love John's tweet earlier this week was don't bet Mark Madsen, and I swear you've had a bunch of people like stop talking about Mark Madsen. Let him bet Mark Madsen. No, I love it. Me and John have great chemistry as always, as you guys obviously saw over the last hour or so. So I'm very much looking forward to these fight night editions of Propping You Up that we're going to be doing. And then Cody will be back obviously for the pay-per-view episodes, but he's going to stay with us by dropping us our 3 best props at the end of the show as well. All right, that's pretty much a wrap. I will be back tomorrow for the Ultimate Wayne show. That will probably go down between 5 and 6 p.m. Eastern time. I don't have the cast set up yet. I had 2 guys that I had on both bailed on me last minute, so I'm going to have some last-minute replacements coming in to try to save the show for us. But tomorrow, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern is going to be the start time, and I'll be doing it live from Circa Sportsbook as well.
Nice.
So it should be a nice little background there for us as well. All right, on behalf of myself and from John, good luck on your best this weekend, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the Ultimate Weigh-In Show. War, Brian Kelleher, and Clay Guida.
Hell yeah, let's go.